The important questions are what and so what. Okay, so what are we trying to do and why is it important? And because you're here, you are interested in conserving a traditional breed. And what's the name of that breed? Texas Longhorns. And there is a traditional type there. Why is that type important? Because we're Texans and we love it. So why is this breed important? History, calving ease, disease resistance, adaptability to this climate, and I would add longevity and fertility are extremely important. And those are the things that we need to guard. You need to figure out how to get to that goal. And that's going to be important, and it's not going to be easy. And most of you go out and you look at your cattle and you're looking at individuals, and what you need to do is you need to start looking at the whole structure of your herd. And the whole structure of your herd as it relates to the other herds in the breed. Now, how many of you love bulls? Bulls. Okay, and then how many of you love cows? Okay, well that's good, okay, because especially in this breed, you really do need to value the cows, and you need to figure out how to evaluate what that cow is producing for you and what that cow is telling you, because at the bottom line is this is a maternal breed. And if we ignore that, then we ignore that to our peril, frankly. So what's the ideal cow? Okay, she weans a calf every 12 months. I actually want her to do better than that. I want her to wean a calf every 10.5 months. Okay, and she can do it. And why is that important? Because over her life, if she lasts a long time and she weans a calf every 10.5 months, by the time she's a teenager, she's weaned as many calves as she is years old. And very, very few other breeds can do that, and I can pick up efficiencies with that. Now, the background of these cattle is they're a Criollo breed, which means basically they're Iberian derived. Now, why is it important that we conserve this Iberian Spanish background of this breed? That ability. And it turns out that the cattle from Spain are different than the cattle anywhere else. And that we can use to our advantage. And that's been actually the advantage of these Criollo breeds and their biggest threat to existence, because they're so different from European cattle and they're so different from Indian cattle that when you cross them, you get incredible hybrid vigor. That's important, and that's why you need to conserve that root of the breed, because it makes this breed incredibly useful for crossbreeding. Now, the problem is those crossbreds are so good that throughout the Americas, historically, what's happened is they would cross them, and so I have a whole bunch of these old Spanish cows, and I go out and I buy a bull, and I cross them. Okay, I'm gonna buy a Charolais bull, because I've heard that come up a whole lot. Okay, so I got all my Longhorn cows, I've got this Charolais bull. These calves are dynamite. Who did it? Most people are gonna say it's that expensive bull I bought, not those crummy little cows I had. Well, it turns out it's those crummy little cows you had that did the trick. Because they were so different than the Charolais that they actually contributed quite a bit. And so throughout the Americas, what's happened is they had those really, really good first cross calves. They would go back and use another Charolais bull, and pretty soon they don't have the old Spanish breed anymore. That's what we need to conserve, because that old Spanish breed is going to be critical for this. And so we have critical breeding practices in maintaining genetic diversity in an endangered breed. And this becomes important, because if you registered 160 of these things last year, that's not very many. And so you have to be very, very careful, because you're not only breeding the next calf crop, but you have to be thinking about what you're going to be doing 10 years from now, okay, as a breed. And that is difficult to do. And there's ways to do that, but one of the things it involves is, I don't know from whom everyone's buying bulls. But if everybody, in some rare breeds, everybody's buying the next breeding male from the same breeder, Well, pretty soon everybody's herd is just like that guy's herd, and that's not good. So each one of you has a responsibility to the breed to be breeding animals that are going to enter the breeding herd and be replacements for what's out there now. And that's really, really difficult, especially if you're a newcomer and you're just starting out. You have a responsibility to come up and do that. Cattle were first domesticated in Iran, in that area. And then they migrate north up through Europe, but they also migrate across the top of Africa. And as they migrate across the top of Africa, they actually pick up genes from local wild cattle as they're going across. Now what happens is they go across North Africa and then they actually jump up through the Straits of Gibraltar into southern Spain and Portugal. And so those breeds actually have more of an African connection. But it's an African connection, not an Indian connection. And that's what makes them so unique. My college roommate and I had a herd of Longhorn cattle. We had Yates Longhorns, we had Shalabans, we had Leleys, and this gets to be where it's interesting. In the Lely herd, they bought one bull and they bought 10 cows from Cap Yates. And then 15, 16, 17 years later, I believe they had 8 or 9 of those cows still left, still calving annually. What they did was they used that same original bull for his entire natural life. And so at one point, we bought a cow that was a Lely bred cow, and she had that bull was her sire, that bull was her grandsire, and that bull was her great-grandsire. Okay? So how much contribution did that original cow make to that final cow? Very, very little, about 12%. Okay? So by using that same bull year after year after year, generation after generation after generation, they basically replaced all of the genetic material in those original cows with the genetic material from that single bull. Following this? Now there was another way to do this, but they didn't do it this way. And that would be that, again, how many of you love cows? Raise your hand. Okay. And it should be everybody. And how many people love bulls? And you shouldn't raise your hand. And so, because we can't love bulls like we can love cows. So what they could have done was taken that bull, bred it to those cows, and saved a son. Use the son when he's 2 years old. I love you. She whoops when I say A&M, and she likes what I'm saying. So basically, the first time you go through, all those calves are half that bull and half each individual cow, right? If I save one of those bull calves and I make that back to those original cows, the next calf crop is 3/4 the influence of those original cows, you know, different cows for different individuals, and then only 1/4 that original bull. And so basically what I'm able to do is I'm able to save and make more uniform that genetic contribution from each one of those in the original population. Does that make sense? Okay, so if I use the same bull year after year after year, especially on his own daughters, that's where I'm making a mistake, because I'm collapsing it on only what that bull brings to me. Talk about the pros and the cons of using the son of that bull. Now, if you imagine this, and I can draw it on the board if we need to, but the pros are that you have brought in more of a contribution from the cow side of things, right? Because it's her son. Now, okay, so if I use that bull, now the cows are going to last forever, right? Because these cows really seriously lasted, I think 8 of them lasted until they were 18 years old. So I'm using her son this time. If I use her son on the other cows, I can even use him on her, but I'm not going to save a bull calf that way. And I save another bull calf, then that bull calf is actually going to be half another old cow, 1/4 his mother, and 1/4 that original sire. And so I'm actually evening it out by saving a bull calf in sequence from each one of those old cows and using it back. And over time, you know, I'm saving heifer calves too, so I'm not going to just keep this herd size at 10. But as I save heifer calves, I'm actually expanding that so that the contribution can be evened out from each one of those original animals, and then I can actually go somewhere. The idea is when you breed closely related animals together, You are concentrating the genetics, and that sounds good until you realize that you're eliminating everything that's outside of that small pool that you're breeding. And in a breed this small, you have to start bringing in a pretty broad representation of what's available to you. And if you don't do that, then this can be a mistake. The vast majority of these animals probably trace back to the Yates herd or to the refuge herd. And the refuge herd is heavily influenced by Yates cattle. My understanding is that outside of that, you do have a few animals that wouldn't go back strongly one way or the other, but would still be considered as typical as the other ones. But they are important for the genetic diversity they bring to you to move into the future. And there's ways to bring that in and use that without losing it, and you just need to be aware that animals that come back and come back a little bit differently into the main herd book are important because they represent that diversity, and if you're not careful, it's going to be eliminated. When I say don't breed closely bred animals together, that's a general rule. Can you think of a situation where maybe you would want to do that? Absolutely. So say that I encountered a very, very typical cow and she had no Yates or wildlife refuge breeding in her at all. She's a cow. Now, there's limits on how many calves she can have. If I take that cow, mate her back to a son, that's about as close as an inbreeding as you can get, and then I cross my fingers and I get a bull calf, I can use that bull calf widely, and then I can spread that cow's genetics throughout my herd or throughout somebody else's herd, somewhere like that. So it increases her contribution across the breed, and if she's part of a rare part of the breed, that really helps. Does that make any sense? Would I want to do that the next generation? No. So I can do that, but it's almost like a short-term rescue effort rather than a long-term, let's do this all the time type idea. And you can actually do this pretty effectively to bring back in some fairly rare influences and even out the contribution for what's going on. Now, the old-timers would have said you can't inbreed a Longhorn. And they may have been right. But the problem is, if you're wrong, you find out too late. Now, you registered 160 animals last year. 150 years ago, how many do you think were out there? Millions, right? So the game has changed. Some strategies that worked in the past are going to work more poorly now, and multi-sire herds are one of those. I like the idea of multi-sire herds with huge numbers of cattle, because then I'm allowing nature and their natural aggression to take care of things. The problem with that now is, unless I can actually know accurate pedigrees, I don't know how to move to the future. And that is a whole lot different with a herd. You know, I'm imagining your population size may be as many as 1,000, maybe 1,500 breeding animals, probably that neighborhood. That's a whole lot different than when you have 10 million. I mean, it's a whole lot different. And so, you know, I'll put a plug in that natural sire mating sounds great, sounds traditional, sounds wonderful, but if we're not careful in today's world, it can lead us astray. Is there a solution to that? Can we still use multi-sire herds and have the answer we need? Yes. If we DNA and parent verify the animals, they still have a pedigree, and we've still let the bulls decide who does what, that's still probably good enough. That you have to actually look beyond just the numbers to the way they're all related. You have to keep in your head a mental image of the ideal cow or the ideal bull. For me, the ideal bull has an ideal cow for a mother. So what is the ideal cow? And everybody's going to have a problem, a different idea with this. Now, it turns out that the breed name here, I think, is unfortunate, because Longhorn has come to mean wide horn. You know, if you're just looking at the tip-to-tip horn structure and the color of the hide, you are not evaluating that animal. So what's the ideal cow? You know, for me, the ideal Longhorn cow, and again, we did raise Longhorns, the ideal Longhorn cow you know, she's 18 years old and she's had 18 calves. You know, she's had a calf every 10.5 months ever since she was 2 years old. Do the math, it may actually be 19. And, you know, raised it well, bred back, and kept going. And other than that, I don't care what she looks like. And I know that's horrible, you know, and there is this Iberian type, you know, of horn shape, head shape, which is strange because you really don't eat the heads and you don't eat the horns, but they really do tell you a lot about the background of the animal. But I can almost guarantee that if she lasted that long, she is going to look like a typical representative of the breed, because if she doesn't, she can't do that job. You know, that type is revealing to you the underlying ability of that animal. You know, so I mean, just because we think it's cosmetics, it's not, but we have to be careful what we put into that external evaluation, because some of the things we can put into it are trivial. I love tricolored speckled cattle. I just think they're beautiful, but that's trivial. So you have to worry about single trait breeding, whether that is tip-to-tip length, big size, smooth conformation, you know, and then trying to predict that, you know, my cow's better than yours because it has longer horns. Well, maybe. You know, if I have a moderately horned, but typical cow that can do the job and last, that's what I want. You know, she's going to be better than the one that's got the more tip-to-tip horn measurement. And you're sitting here in this room because basically you doubt that this single trait selection is good for the breed. Otherwise, you'd be sitting in somebody else's breed association meeting and you'd be, you know, selecting for speckled hides, huge animals, and horn-to-horn measurement, period. And so, you know, don't forget that, because it's hard. And it's really, really hard if you're evaluating these to pick out that more moderate, you know, small cow that's got moderate horns that may actually be doing a good job, but she should not only be valued, but she should also actually be a candidate for bull production if she's doing a really, really, really good job. So we have to manage what we have. I'm going to take a divergence here. We're going to talk a little bit about inspection processes, why they're important, and how they can go astray. And then we're going to come back and maybe talk about different ways to organize herds and things like that. The Texas Longhorn is what in the Livestock Conservancy we call a landrace, which means it's a local breed that just kind of developed locally, and originally it was isolated only because of geography, so communication was poor and transportation was difficult, especially in the 1800s, right? Now, in addition, they had the secret weapon of Texas fever, which was probably anaplasmosis or babesiosis. These are two diseases. If the cattle get them as calves, they're fine. If they get them as adults, it kills them in a hurry. So basically, anything that was brought in from north and east of here died because it didn't have calfhood exposure to these diseases. And so it wasn't really until the late 1800s and the early 1900s that anything else could come in and actually survive all that well. Okay, so that's fine. That keeps our breed pure, no problem. After that, it gets to be difficult. So now, how many of you have smartphones? Okay, so we have instantaneous communication, instantaneous ideas, and how many of you got here by driving on an interstate? So that's the other problem, is that communication and transportation have both increased, so we cannot rely on the previous methods for landrace isolation because they simply don't exist. So now we have the Cattlemen's Texas Longhorn Registry, which is supposed to do this job for us. And the goal, and this is my goal, people are going to differ, the goal should be to include every pure example of the breed and to exclude every impure example of the breed. Now, getting there is actually quite difficult, but that's the goal, okay? Now, how do we do this? So for landrace populations, I am a big fan of open herd books, meaning animals can come in by validation and by inspection. Now, what this means is going to differ breed to breed to breed, and in this situation, it gets dicey because there's reasons for this and there's reasons against this. If you close the books, then you have neatly decided that this is what this breed is, period, and we have captured it all. And I don't think that's true. I think that there's stuff out there that you have not yet captured that may actually be of use to you. Now, the other reason that people usually close herd books is to protect their own vested self-interest and economic interest in the breed. Because if I have a rare breed and I keep it rare, then people that are interested in rarity for rarity's sake find that attractive. Now that's cynical, but it does happen, okay? Now, reasons against it are that if we've lost something and we've left it out, there might be reasons to bring that back in. I work with a lot of different breeds. I've been working with Choctaw horses for 40 years. And we pretty much know where all the Choctaw horses are in Oklahoma. And so I'm down in South Mississippi inspecting these Piney Woods cattle, which are a cousin breed to the Texas Longhorn. And out of the woods, single foots this trio of stallions. And I looked at the guy and I said, where did you get these horses? I mean, they are perfect Choctaw pony type. He said, oh, they just came with the ranch 30 years ago. Bought it from a Choctaw and he had these, you know. And I thought, you gotta be kidding. You know, so we DNA typed them, and it turns out that they DNA type, you know, if you just didn't know anything about the horses and you compared their DNA, the thing that they most closely link to is Choctaw horses. So here after, well, when did they remove the Choctaws from Mississippi? 1830, okay? So here's something that stayed in that local area since 1830 in an identifiable form, and we're able to bring them back into the breed, you know, after more than 100 years, which is pretty amazing. So that's why I like open herd books, is you have, you know, the scary stories like that, you know. But we were able to save that, you know, at the last minute. So how do we do this? And there's different ways to do it. In the old days, we used to have blood typing, which was useful. Visual inspection is actually going to be, it's a three-legged stool. You're going to have visual inspection and an evaluation of the history, and then any sort of genetic testing that you can do. And you can't pull this trick off with just one or two of those. You actually do need all three. And over time, I have come to respect more and more a careful and informed visual evaluation. Now, when I say that, if I run the cattle through here individually and look at them, that's one thing. If I go out and I look at an entire herd, that's going to be something else. So on that entire herd, are 10% of them typical and 90% non-typical? That's telling me something. And if I run them through individually, I'm just going to pick out the typical ones, but I'm ignoring the fact that 90% of them are not typical. If on the other hand, I have a herd and 95% of them are typical, that's telling me something different that's quite important, okay? So herds, you want to do herds when you can rather than individuals. And then again, the history. Is the history accurate? You know, where did they come from? Who had them? Where did they get the foundation stock? And how were they bred afterwards? And is the fence any good? You know, so that's going to be important. And I mean, and there's some scary stories. So we were talking last night about, you know, some animals that are 3/4 Texas Longhorn, 1/4 Watusi might phenotypically pass the evaluation. If I had 100 of them, that only might be 5 or 6 out of the 100 that would do that. And that's why you want the entire group. You don't want just the selected ones that they think are going to pass. You want to look at the entire group. Now, the DNA analysis, for the reasons brought up a little bit earlier, is dicey. It looks like it's going to be fairly decent at picking out recent Indicus type, Brahma type breeding. It is likely to not be as decent as picking up European influence, and that is a problem. Now, if you have a decent visual and historical evaluation, you're still probably going to make very, very few mistakes. But basically over time, this whole process needs to tighten up. So it gets more and more difficult, less and less trivial, and that's okay. The things that are out there that you have not included still become important and perhaps even have greater importance with time, but they're going to be more and more rare and less likely for you to have missed previously and so that's okay. So we're going to go ahead, and this may be too specific, but this is just one strategy that we worked up for our herd. When my college roommate and I had a herd, it was about 70 cows. Goal was 120, but I don't think we ever got there. And so what we would do is, and if this gets confusing, we can try to draw it out. First of all, you number the cows. And then we would use a bull at 2 years old over the entire herd. And we would use them for a year. We could calve all year round. That gave us the advantage of being able to test the cows to see which ones bred back and calved every 10.5 months versus the ones that didn't. So, okay, so we have our 2-year-old bull, we put him in there, and then at the end of that, he goes away. So his calves are incubating, and then we'd use a different bull the next year. So the first year's bulls are growing, the second year's bulls are incubating, and the third year bulls are basically on the ground growing with their mothers, right? So by using 2-year-old bulls, we're able to take 3 different lines of bulls through the herd sequentially, and then for our replacements, we can selectively pick either moderately line bred or line crossed animals to balance the genetics in the herd. So what we did was we kind of subdivided the genetics of the herd more by time than we did by cross-fencing or separating them out individually. Now the advantages for us were we had Shalaban cattle and we had Lely cattle, and then we had some Garnet cattle as well. Never had enough of those. And so we were able to use bulls that were line bred back to those 3 lines sequentially through the herd without separating the herd spatially, so by cross-fencing. And that worked for us. And a second advantage of it was the bulls never got old enough to start jumping fences and going and visiting the neighbors. And that kept peace in the neighborhood, which was a good thing. So it worked for us. Does it work for everybody? No. Is there a defect in the system? Yes. What if the bull's really, really excellent? What would be a strategy there? You could freeze semen on the bulls that turn out to be excellent, so that either you ship them or you sell them, you've still got them in the freezer, and that can work for you for conservation purposes. So, I mean, the bottom line is, it is doable. You can do this, but you have to pay attention, and importantly, you have to work together. And we're all sitting here in this room because our ancestors could not get along with somebody, and so they moved. Okay? No, I mean, that's a fact, okay? So it takes real effort, for a breed association to actually work together for the good of the breed and for the good of the breeders and for the good of the breed's future.